Okay, we got audio. We got John Pousette Dart on the phone again. We talked to you, what, in August of last year?
I think it's roughly around there, yeah.
Yeah, and so you're back March 1 in Sedgwick?
Fir- First at the River Club Musical, yeah, huh?
Wow. Uh,
It's a nice room. It's a nice room, yeah. They're good guys down there.
yeah, I hear everyone has fun down there.
It's a good room, yeah.
So welcome to our podcast from first time here. But this is funny because this room is where 20 years ago I used to edit my VHS tapes back there. Probably you at the Paradise, which I got on VHS at that
I,
gun thing.
I gotta say, it's like in the time that you and I have been around doing this, back in the, when I first started out, when we were active, really active, touring a lot. There was no videos. I mean, there was there was no MTV, there was no nothing. So a lot of that stuff really didn't get captured. And then early on, my wife's a documentary filmmaker, and she did a lot of films back then. And we've been going back, and as the stuff was shot through when we've gone through shooting when it was eight, then high eight, video eight, and went through all these different formats, and we had shot with all these different cameras, and you wind up with all of this and VHS and beta and all that, and you wind up with this bank of stuff that you can't just move over digitally. It has to all be done in real time. So it's just unbelievable amount of work to try and go back and convert all of this old footage that you shot from back in those days because it's all real time. You can't just like dump it like you can with digital.
Oh, I understand. There's a friend of mine, Eric Taros. I don't know if you've seen the name around. He he's working with Apple, the Beatles, in England, but he lives in Swampscott.
Mhm.
So what Eric did was his parents wouldn't let him see the Beatles because he was too young. What, in
Hmm.
'66 with Bobby Ebb?
Hmm.
So he went out and found audio tapes and 8 millimeter film of the Beatles in
Mhm.
64 and 66, and he's matched them together. Painstaking work, and it cost a fortune. And
Yeah.
I'm in his office watching Beatles videos that never existed.
Wow, that's funny. It's
So
funny that his parents wouldn't let him watch it.
they wouldn't let him go to the show in Revere at Suffolk Downs.
That's funny.
Well, so a 12-year-old denied going to see the Beatles, and he's a big Beatles fan, so he does radio shows and such. Anyways, and it opened him up to that, and then he worked with Peter Jackson on that Get Back movie,
Sure,
and then the one before it, 8 Days a Week, was his baby.
sure, sure.
So, but they were intrigued by what he did, and then they brought him on board doing some consulting or whatever. So,
Mhm.
can I ask about your wife and the documentary work, what she's
Yeah,
worked on?
Dawn. My wife is an actress, and she's been doing documentary films for quite a while. The first one she did was we have an interesting relationship because we were both married before and had children from our previous marriages, and we met. I met her at the old Lone Star in New York years ago, and we immediately kind of were attracted to each other. So we got together and we raised each other's kids, and so her son that I raised since he was a young kid, Wolf, was the captain of the U.S. Olympic water polo team for three Olympics. So we went through all the Olympics with him, and she shot that. Um, Starting out with the Atlanta Olympics, which we were at when the bomb went off, we were like right there. And she shot all this footage, and she made a film called Beneath the Surface, which was really kind of well received, and it's still out there. And then she went on to do the next film she did was uh, I was writing with a woman from Nashville named Jamie Kyle's an old friend of mine. We've been in co-writing for years, way back in Nashville. And I was to go down and had a session, a writing session with her in Nashville. And at the time that I went down, her mother just died from Alzheimer's, and Dawn's mother just died from Alzheimer's. So Dawn sent me down with all these notes that were just kind of on her mind at the time. And we wrote this song called Who I Am, which became a video on the record Anti-Gravity. And she did a documentary of that, which has been worked into festivals around the world and became a really well-known it got accepted in film festivals all around the world and won a lot of awards. So that became a piece that she did, and she's working on another one now, another one about Alzheimer's, simply because it's so present in so many people's lives. And so she's been kind of, she's a New York Woman film, and she is involved with a lot of projects kind of on that level, and she's very passionate about. So through our years together, we've kind of gotten associated with working on different films and such.
Yeah, that's marvelous. That's really, you're right. Alzheimer's is just everywhere.
It's
And
just, part of our lives at this point. I mean, it's become something that's, I mean, I have a mother, my mother's 104 and she's still here, and she doesn't have exactly Alzheimer's, but she's, there's pockets of memory that come back. And, the thing that really made this film come to fruition is when her mother was in, at a place out in Bethlehem, PA called Trexler, this, house she was in with a lot of folks in, her age. And we used to go out there, and I would bring a guitar out, and when I would play and sing, people just all of a sudden came to, they just came alive, and so they would request songs. And the way the documentary started is one of the women requested, you said, "Do you know the song The Isle of Capri?" And I said, "Well, no, but I'll learn it." And I went back and I came back the next time and I learned the song. And we sat down with them, and Dawn filmed all this, and they said, "Do you know the Isle Green?" I said, "Yes, I learned it." So we sang the song, and then all of them joined in. The entire room of people sang the song "Isle of Capri." And as soon as the song finished, this woman said, "Do you know the Isle of Capri?" They didn't even know they just sang it, and we sang it again. And then we finished that time, and they said, "Do you know the Isle of Capri?" So I mean, this and that became, the film, because it's just, just bring back all these memories from your past.
did she, you cut out for a second. Did she recall it after a while, after you kept saying it? Did the
Um,
woman,
they recalled it, they after they sang it a couple of times, I think it came back. But I mean, they knew it when they were doing it, but I'm saying as soon as time passed, the first time they forgot it, and then the second time they remembered it. But it's just how it crystallizes things at the moment. Music and smell does the same thing. You walk in a room, you smell something, you go, "Oh, that was," you immediately, your senses know, pick up things from when you were a child, or so, just instantaneous things. So it's really music, and your senses are just amazing that way, how what it brings back.
it's amazing when those songs spin in your head and you didn't call it up on your own, but all of a sudden, or you have a dream and a song that you know is in the dream. It
Yes,
really is amazing.
yes.
I'm trying to figure that out. Like,
I don't know. I don't know if you'll figure that one out.
if I don't like a song that's in my head, I try to find one like on a radio dial, but in my head, and then just keep singing it. And sometimes it catches, sometimes it doesn't.
What's really bad is when a really bad song keeps going around your head that you don't want to remember, and it keeps going around your head.
And it's like, how did they get on the air?
Right, right.
I mean, it's like, so many of your songs are radio worthy. Um, and I love what you did with Never Enough when things go wrong.
Oh,
I just love how you took that. Robin's going to be on the show soon.
I love Robin.
I do too. She's great.
She's a great girl.
I mean, that band, they were like a Boston's Birds, but with a female vocalist.
Yeah, that was all happening, they were going on at the same time when we were there, and they were always, Robin was always really great, and and Tim and all those guys were always a big favorite, and we had, I mean, there was a lot of mutual friends at that time hanging around. We all knew each other.
A funny story about Tim. He was at a film screening, and I go to all these screenings. Do you know Ed
Mhm.
Simkus, the writer?
I know his name. I don't think I know him personally, but I think I know who he is. Yeah.
He's good friends with Tim. Now, Tim and I know each other, right? But we hadn't seen each other in maybe 30 years. And we're on
Right.
the bus with Ed, and we didn't realize it was each other. It
Uh-huh.
was, and then we figured it out at the end. It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But Tim's a great, great drummer.
He's a lovely guy. Well, there was a whole school of folks back then when we were in Boston. At that time, Bonnie was there. I was good friends with Bonnie. We were all hanging out together. Bonnie was there, and there was a really good singer-songwriter named Reeve Little who passed early on. And Peter Bell was a really good guitar player, still around. He was there. And Spider John Kerner was there at that time. It was really a great old blues, guitar player. And there was a really kind of very, it was a really vibrant scene at that time in around town, and it was a really good time to be there. And I was just, really fortunate that I wound up there because it was just really at Don Law's behest that I kind of got there because he saw me play with somebody up in Nantucket. He saw me open for John Hammond in Nantucket and then asked me to come to Boston. And that was really the beginning of why I came there. He just said, do you want to work together? And I said, sure. And I went to Boston. And it just happened to be that was kind of, the scene in Boston at that time, which was really a very kind of fruitful and fortuitous time on the Boston music scene.
You play with the great John Hammond.
It's we I was I he was playing at a place called the Chicken Box, and a friend of mine said, "Why don't you get up and try and audition for him?" And I was, just a green kid, and I went up and played a few songs in front of him. And he said, "Why don't you stay on and open the next three nights?" And I opened for him at the Chicken Box, and then one of the nights, Don Law came by, and Don Law Senior, Don Law's father, and John Hammond Senior were talent scouts together at CBS.
Right.
So Don knew John, and he was at the show, and he asked me what I was doing after the show, and he said, why don't you come by Boston and we'll meet? And I went there, and then he took me on as manager, and that was that.
That's an amazing story.
It was just one of those things that just fate.
So back in the day, Wayne Wadhams had a hit with "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead." He was in the Fifth Estate, and then he
Yeah.
built the Berkeley Studios.
hmm
But he had something called Studio B on Boylston Street, and he had an album out called Chef Salad. And then
hmm
Jack's put out Live at Jack's, so they were like kind of the first two compilations of Boston area music from like 74, 75, around that
hmm
time. Do you ever play Jack's?
I lived right next door to Jack's. My first apartment was 888 Mass Ave, which was the building next to Jack's.
Oh, that's
So
funny.
I used to get out. We used to hang at Jack's all the time. Bonnie was there, and Spider John Kerner would play there, and then the Plow and the Stars was right next door, and the Irish Bar, and that was quite a scene. Jack's was a real scene back then. So I was there a lot because we lived next, literally in the building next door to it.
What a question. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah. Plow and Stars are still active.
I I'm sure it is.
It's, things come and go, but Plow and Stars are still there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there were some really great places back then. I had all these friends who used to who worked, in the restaurants there. And I mentioned to you earlier, there was a place called the No Name Restaurant down on the wharf, which was one of my favorite places to
Oh,
go. And
loved it.
all my friends I grew up with from here, and I'm from New York, and all of my friends that I grew up with all worked as cooks there. So I used to go and hang out at the No Name a lot. And way back then was the first legal seafood, which I also lived right next to in Inman Square. And it's going back there a few years.
Roger Berkowitz,
Yep.
the owner, but you know who his brother is, right?
I don't know if I know his
Steve
brother.
Berkowitz.
I don't think I knew.
So
I mean,
Steve was the road manager for Willie Loco Alexander when Willie was on
sure, sure,
MCA,
sure.
and we put out a bootleg. Willie wanted a bootleg out. He was so upset with MCA, homogenizing his music. So
Mhm.
we put an ERS broadcast out, and I remember we were up there in New Hampshire, and Steve Berkowitz is there, and Willie's just flinging the albums after autograph. It was really funny. So Steve went on to be road manager for the Cars, but now he's at Sony New
Steve has
York.
been around forever. He's great. Yeah.
Oh, so you know him? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. He worked with Michael Jackson, I think, and yeah, another one from our scene that it's interesting the people that are still here and the longevity and the history, which, I mean, this video is history. I feel like a documentarian talking to people about the days because I think it's important history.
Well, it was a really, as I said, it was just it was a really ripe time in Boston. It just so happened that all these things were kind of converging at the same time. And Don had just come out of, Club 47, and he'd just, he was kind of ensconced in it. So I was, and kind of starting to work with Don, I kind of got ensconced deep in the scene because he was really kind of there at the beginning when all that was going on, and he was so instrumental in kind of the in the promotion scene. And so I was kind of very lucky to kind of, be in the thick of a lot of activity that was going on. So it was a really, really, I was fortunate time to arrive there.
Do you have recordings from those days?
We have a lot of old, really, I have like a wall of cassettes from when we used to go back there and rehearse. We used to rehearse this place called Perfect Crime Studios, which was an old Apple kind of cider factory in Watertown. And I have just tons of tapes. We used to go there and rehearse and record, and a lot of it, the recordings were were really good. And it was really just, and it was all live. It was all, we did it all live, and it was with the original band. And so I have a lot of great stuff from that was documented through there. It's never been it's never been released, just because some of it is released in the archives that I posted at my website. And the website that I have now is all being, I'm about to release a brand new website we're working on right now. But some of those archives are in there of recordings that we got there. But so I guess the answer is yeah. It
So the
was
guy at Perfect Crime, Rob, was it Rob?
his name was it'll come back to me in 1 second. Derek Huntington.
Ah,
Oh,
okay.
Derek Huntington owned it, and he was a close friend, and he had that for years, and that was a really great little room. It was a really great period of time.
I think I remember that room because I remember Watertown, and maybe it changed hands when I got in there.
It might have, because Derek passed quite a few years back, and he subsequently, left it, and I don't know where it went after it left his hands. That I don't.
Yeah, I was in there December 1980. I remember because it was when John Lennon passed. We were in there that night
Okay.
recording a band called the Runes, Runes, and they're still
Mhm.
this interesting. The echo of the bands is on Facebook. So I see the band members, writing on Facebook, and it's just funny how years progress, but you can get these echoes. But I love your website.
Well, I like the site is good, but the thing is, it was started a long time ago, so it's been like assembled from many pieces put together, and we're about to. I just met a wonderful young woman who I've been working for. What I've been doing recently is I'm working mostly duo now with a guitar player named Jim Chapdelaine, who's like a brother to me. We've been playing 25 years together, and it's just like it's totally seamless. And so we're doing a lot of acoustic duo things just because it's really intimate and close, and it's really, people really respond to it. And we met a really wonderful young woman who was a friend of his daughter's, who's now helping to completely redesign a new site. So that's forthcoming, which I'm really excited about because she's doing some really great work. So, but we're trying to incorporate it all to make it very more, immediate. So it's real, it's like really fluid and simple and straightforward. So I'm working that's really important to me, to make things to have access very simply.
Well, I like, of course, the archive section.
Yeah, well, that'll stay. I'll probably be adding to that. The biggest obstacle to the archive is me, because it's a lot of work to go back. I mean, I literally have so much stuff that it's kind of daunting to even start, because once you open, it's like a Pandora's box once you start doing that. And it's just a whole mode that will just take up, you can take up a months just literally going through this stuff and doing it because it's so time intensive. So, someday I'll probably have more patience to kind of spend more time doing it, but I find it very daunting when you sit there and look at kind of, a couple of decades worth of audio, and it's just, and same thing with the video, when it comes down to kind of trying to get it in a format where you can release it now in the mediums that are there now where you can stream it, yeah, it's labor intensive, and it brings back a lot. You go there and all of a sudden you're back in, a whole nother frame of mind.
So do you back these up on hard drives?
No, I don't.
I do.
I mean, I have some I have, but the bulk of the things that I have are on cassette, of course, because that was the prevalent medium
Right.
that everything wound up. I mean, back when I was with Capitol, when we were mailing stuff back and forth to each other with what are we going to cut and all this, we were all just passing around cassettes. And so, I mean, I still have stuff that I get from, from John Carter at Capitol. He'd send me a cassette. He'd go, "This is a hit." Well, he'd send me the,
Wow.
you know,
John Carter, who wrote
things are pretty blunt
Strawberries.
record labels.
Huh? I'm sorry.
I'm saying things were pretty blunt in the
Oh,
communication with record labels.
John Carter wrote Incense and Peppermints.
Yeah, he did. John Carter was a character like no other. I'm telling you, he was a real character to be around, and he was my responsive A&R man when I was with Capitol.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
legendary. Yeah, he was in Connecticut, I think.
Well, the way we got signed was when we got signed, we had at that time we were trying to get, we had submitted to Arista and Columbia and Epic and Warner and all the different labels, and then there was a legendary record man named Al Corey,
Oh, yeah.
and sent the tapes to him, and he was from Boston, so he came to Boston. I think I don't think he really even knew who we were. He just wanted to come to Boston because it was his hometown, and he came to Boston. And Don invited him, and he came and he signed us. But he in that week he signed something like eight to ten acts. He signed us, Boyce and Hart, who wrote the Monkey stuff,
Sure.
and he signed a bunch of other acts. And then 2 weeks later, there was a power struggle at Capitol, and Al Zimmerman he was having a power struggle with Al Zimmerman. Al Zimmerman took over. He was fired, and he's the guy that signed us. And so, 3 weeks later, we're sitting out at the Brown Derby in Hollywood and Vine, Dawn and I, and we're sitting down with the guys from Capitol, and they're going, so who are you guys? And they just signed us, and they didn't even know who we were.
Wow.
Excuse my, I shouldn't have sworn.
That's
Sorry.
all right. We'll bleep you out. Uh, Al Corey, I think, went on to manage Irene Cara.
Yeah, well, Al was one of the real old school, that was the old school record guys. He was one of those really legendary guys, and at that time he was the president of Capitol when we were signed.
I was going to New York quite a bit with Jimmy Miller, the Rolling Stones producer,
Sure.
back in the day. So Jimmy and I would go and shop our tapes, and he'd be stunned because he was A&R at Island, and
Right.
he brought Procol Harum's Whitest Shade of Pale to Chris Blackwell,
Mm, mm,
and Blackwell now he regrets passing on it because it was
mm,
such a mega hit. He says one of my big
yeah.
mistakes. So Jimmy and I are in New York. We're at Capitol Records. I won't say the A&R's guy's name. And he looks at us and he goes, "Joe, do you have any Willie Loco Alexander on you?" Well, I was
Mm,
Willie's manager. I had my
mhm.
briefcase. I just say, "Here." He goes, "I love him, but I can't sign him." And we walk out, and Jimmy's like, "I signed what I loved. These guys don't sign what they love." We went to 3 different record labels. They asked for Willie Loco stuff, but they wouldn't sign them.
Well, listen, it was very hard to get signed back in those days. I mean, we got passed on by everybody. I mean, I remember, but we got it's there's so many strange, it's so kind of incestuous of what the record business used to be like. We got turned down by Arista, and then one day I was walking down the street and I ran into Bob Fiden, who was Clive Davis's left hand. He was the guy, he was his main assistant.
Sure.
And I just bumped into him. It was after they had passed on us, and I said, I'm looking for a place. He said, "Well, I live right here, and I'm leaving it. I'm moving out." I said, "Oh, I'll take it." So I just took his apartment sight unseen, just from bumping into him in the street. So the way things would occur back then was like, you know, so it was just a very different period of time.
It was. And Clive had ears, but Bob Fiden, Feiden, that guy.
That's correct.
Oh,
That's
wow.
Bob.
Yeah, he was top dog back then.
He was a very nice guy. But then, it's like getting signed is a whole other thing. The whole time that I wanted to get signed was who I wanted to get signed to was Warner, because Warner had everybody. I wanted to work with Ted Templeman and Russ Titleman. I loved that whole production staff there. And I actually called them up when I was with Capital and asked them if those guys, if I could work with them, and they wouldn't work with me because I was Capital and they were Warner, and they had their work was booked 2 years out. So I always had wanted to that was back when Warner Bros. Would release these really great releases, the Lost Leaders. They'd put them out and there'd be like Ry Cooder and all these
Oh
people,
yeah,
and
I
they
got them all. Oh yeah,
yeah,
that
and
stuff is
and
great.
they had such a great staff of producers and stuff at that time, and I just loved that staff. But I couldn't touch the Warner, whole Warner group of people wouldn't touch me because we were Capital.
And that's very strange because when, say, Rod Stewart came to Boston and he was playing with the Faces on Warner Brothers, but he was on Mercury, and they had that attitude. But then because he was in both bands and he started breaking, they were working together, and then when they worked together, they broke the hits quicker. It
Sean Rock,
made sense for Warner Brothers to work with you on Capitol, but they
sure.
didn't want to see it. I mean, the whole industry is crazy.
Well, the business has always been, it's always been a real, very, very. I mean, uh, ever since we broke up, and I've been trying to get my master's back from Capital for 40 years, and
You're
they wouldn't give
kidding.
it back to me. 40 years I tried to get my master's back, and I tried everything possible under the sun to get them back, and they would not give them to me. And then just by fluke, my lawyer, Judy Tint, was out in Las Vegas a couple of years ago and was at some symposium and sat next to the head of Universal. Universal absorbed Capital, and just somehow mentioned to him to that she was working with me, and I was trying to get my master's back, and he just granted me my master's back, just like that, just like just in a conversation. When I had been trying for 40 years to get it, so finally I got him back. But what we're doing is the reason I think that they were amenable to it is because we're going to go out and reissue the vinyl in high-end masters, limited run high-end masters with really beautiful packaging, high-end audiophile mastering, in conjunction with a label called Direct Grace Records. And Direct Grace Records rescues children sold into slavery worldwide. So it'll be for, not to as a commercial venture, but to do something worthwhile. And I think that made a big difference.
That's amazing. Do they do half speed mastering?
We're going to do limited, yeah, we're going to do, I happen to live right near Peekskill, which is a Master Disc and some other, and my friend Peter Letterman, who runs Soundsmith, have some of the really good lathes and direct, mastering facility here. And so they have done a lot of that. And I did some direct just disc recording with Peter, with a number of us, Bill Frisell and Doug Womble, and I did live recordings where you go in and the green light goes on and you cut the whole side of the side one, you stop, the red light goes off, and you turn over the vinyl and you record the whole second side. So we did some of those right down here. But we got the masters back from Capitol, fortunately, and we're in the process of trying to reissue it now, but it's just, putting it all together. And then the pandemic hit, which slowed it down. So it's getting back there.
That's great stuff. So, what format are the masters on? 16,
That
8?
we don't, they gave us the high res digital masters. They wouldn't give us the vinyl. They wouldn't give us the lacquers. They didn't give us the lacquers. They gave us the what do you call it? When it's crossed over. I forget what the word would be. But we have the highest res master digitally. But we're committing it back to disk. So it's going to be the same as if it was, but it's just not coming off a disk. Because the resolution is it's as high as it can get.
96K or something?
I think it's above that.
Wow.
I think the masters that we have are I believe are 192. I'm not sure.
Wow, which only a dog can hear.
Yeah. So we've been something that, and then my friend, unfortunately, who I've been involved with doing this, got very, very ill. And so, it's just been this trying time between the pandemic and everybody and the COVID and everybody kind of getting hit with all these things that slowed the wheels down on the process, but we're slowly getting back to getting that done.
So, this,
Everything takes long. Everything takes longer than you want it to.
of course, Now, when the releases come out, will they come out like in a box set, or will it be each CD
I
singly?
think we're gonna issue them separately. You know, they're gonna be done as a, and it'll be, and we'll basically make some noise about it. And we're also gonna do some filming, about the process.
Nice.
And, and I'm just very fortunate to have some really good folks down here. Scott Hull from Master Disc is right down here, and Peter Letterman is involved with Direct Grace, and Peter makes is amazing. He's one of the world's most well-known. He makes the most high-end audiophile equipment possible. I mean, he makes turntables where you can see, it shows you how deep the needle's in the groove. And
Oh man,
it's like these guys and these people who these audiophile recordings. I went did a convention with him. These people are crazy. They'll buy like one of these discs and they only take it out like once a year or take it to a special listening party, and then they put it back and then they don't play it. I mean, they're really it's a whole nother it's another world
it
on from
is.
it,
Yeah.
So we're kind of doing something that's kind of it's gonna, hopefully be a pretty it'll be a very it'll be a really nice thing to have, to pick up. It'll be really worthwhile.
So on these original masters, are there any lost tracks, unreleased tracks?
No, not on these. No, and there's actually some tracks I wish that I'd had that went by the wayside. And also, my original, all the multi tracks that I had are gone because they got
Ah,
destroyed. And also, the thing is, there's a lot of regrets about that. But boy, it's really difficult to kind of go back and kind of be dealing with that stuff in the original format. It's very, very difficult unless you have the 2 inch or the 1 inch. And so. There were definitely some tracks on a few of the records that I wish that I'd had access to, but unfortunately, when you finish a project, sometimes, especially from that far back, some of the stuff just gets, you know, it just gets shelved, and it's kind of hard to come by, and also just keeping track of all that analog stuff is just a whole nother. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that in that huge fire that took place on the in LA on the back of the Warner Brothers lots, there was a huge catalog from a lot of the record company stuff was in there. A lot of the original BB King recordings and stuff from way back. A lot of stuff that was destroyed. And luckily, our masters weren't in that lot and were shipped off to Kansas. And so our stuff didn't wind up in that huge fire that destroyed eons of old recordings that I don't think the record companies even want you to know what was destroyed in that fire.
oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Iron Mountain has a lot of tapes from I forget which label, but they put them up at Iron Mountain, which is probably safer, to have them in these facilities.
That's a whole nother animal. Yeah, I mean, keeping track of that stuff is it used to be back in the old days, a lot of the stuff was underneath in the Hollywood Tower, underneath in the Capitol and Vine, on Hollywood and Vine. There was underneath the parking lot, there was also one of the biggest reverb chambers. No, that was one of the most famous reverb chambers was in the parking lot underneath the tower. And there was a big storage facility there, but all that stuff has got, all moved around. It's all gone. And the original stuff at Capitol is no longer there, just Studio A is still there, but that's about it.
But sometimes years later, you look back and say, that isn't as bad a mix as I thought it was.
Yeah, it's funny when you go back and hear that stuff. I mean, I don't really love going back and hearing my earlier recordings just because, I was so much younger, and you hear it, you hear it when I sing, when I hear my vocals and stuff like that, I go, oh God, it sounds like a kid saying that. It's like, it's, you have such a perspective about, coming from a different place. And, I feel like now, even though I'm, quite a bit older, I mean, I feel like I'm a much better singer now than I was then. And so it's just, things, it's just, age and time have a have an effect on when you go back and listen to your own stuff.
Well, Elton John wasn't happy with his vocals on Madman Across the Water, that album. And it's a great album.
Yeah.
So the artist has one perspective, but the listeners are like, wow, I really like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm super critical of the way I sound on the early records, but that's just part. I mean, it's just, I guess that's par for the course.
On Bobby Hebb's Sonny, there's a bass note that's off. And Bobby would say to me, that bass note it really irritates me. I'm like, Bobby, you and I are the only two people in the universe that hears it,
Yeah.
and it doesn't bother me, you know? So, like, it's a hit record. They all love it. It stood the test of time. No one hears that bass note. They don't hear the clunker on Dream On by Aerosmith. There's like one guitar note that's off. You've never heard it. No one ever has, but it's
No,
there.
and a lot of times the mistakes that are on there are kind of what are endearing. It's kind of that goes back to, when you try, a lot of for a long time we were thinking about going back and recutting all the masters just because I couldn't get them back, which is a lot of people in Nashville have done that. They'll go back and recut their own masters. But the value in the masters a lot of is the people that have heard the song as it was there, and they don't really want to hear the different version. They want to hear what they heard back then. So, that's kind of case in point what you just said. People really get married to what they heard in the beginning.
Did you know Little Walter from Little Walter's Time Machine?
I didn't know him. I mean, I obviously knew who he was, but
Yeah.
I didn't know him.
He became a great 50s mastering engineer. We lost him during COVID. He died on his birthday, January 16th. But
Hmm.
I work with his wife. Just texted her. She's off to a wedding, and it's interesting because he was such a good friend, and he would be a stickler for. He did the Oldies 103 catalog.
Uh-huh.
So if I heard a Little Eva Locomotion, which I love, right, and you hear
Hmm.
a different version, I'm like, yeah, but he would correct it to put the original version you heard on the radio. He did not want the outtakes out. It was just interesting his percept. He's into the what they originally heard. Me, I want to hear the outtakes. He was the programmer at Oldies 103, so a lot of people didn't know that it was his collection that went on the air.
I see.
He was a stickler for her getting it that way. But
Yeah.
there's all these different nuances. I'm just glad that you're putting the stuff back out again this way.
Well, it's taken a while, it's taking longer than I want, I'm trying to get it on track right now, but as I mentioned, the hardest thing is the people that we know. So many people I know have been having horrendous, medical things going on in their lives. And so it's just, we're trying to get past some of this stuff to get back in motion because time takes its toll, but we're getting there. We now have everything in our possession. So that's the good part.
Yeah, Melanie was in Medford and I wanted to interview her, and now she's gone. And it's like, damn, you can't be everywhere at once, you know? But I love to talk about great records. And that was, she made some great records.
Yeah. Well, one thing, the last you were mentioning albums, and the last record I did called Talk, I was very, it was a culmination of a lot of things that came together. When I first went to Nashville, when they first sent us down there, we had no idea what was going on. They signed us and they just said, "Okay, you're going to Nashville and you're going to work with Norbert Putnam." I went, "Oh, okay." And they sent us down to Nashville. And when I went down there, I walked in on the end of the Dobie Gray Drift Away sessions
Wow.
and they were just coming out finishing it. And Reggie Young was in there. Gene Eichelberger was the engineer. There was Steve Gibson and Reggie Young, who were both Reggie Young was one of my favorite guitar players growing up, and he was there. And I remember making a mental note when I first went there that someday I want to work with these guys. And so, you know, table turns many, many, many years later, there was a producer and a genius engineer, one of the great guys in music named Bill Vorndick in Nashville. And we became friends. And I asked him to produce the last record, and he came on board and he helped assemble kind of this really dream team of the best guys from Muscle Shoals in Memphis, including Reggie Young. And we did the record Talk. And since then, I did the last sessions with Reggie before he died. Bill just died. And Pete Huttlinger, who was also, I was managed by his wife at the time, was with the Finger Picker of the Year, like amazing guitar player. They've all passed. So I just feel like I was just blessed to get this record with these guys uh, before they were gone. And so that was that. So that record really meant a huge amount to me. And it was just an amazing, I really got to, we did it at Ronnie Millsap's old place. And it was just a dream. It was a dream. It was like, I was just so glad. And that was the last record I did. And then I put all this energy into it, and I signed it to Sony Red, and I really wanted, to get some exposure to it, and it just went right by. It was like nothing had even happened. It was just because the game had changed. It was like the whole book of promotion had changed to what it is now. And that's what really changed my perspective about, what? I'm gonna put stuff out when I get it. And I'm gonna just start putting it directly out to the fan base and listeners right away, as opposed to just kind of spending all this time, because you put all this work into it and it's gone, and there's so many tracks in there that I think are, mean the world to me, and it was kind of invisible. And so, it's hard, it's really hard when you put a lot of effort into something, and then, it doesn't kind of achieve what you want it to.
Yeah, today is John Lennon's Instant Karma. He wrote a song and wanted it out right away. It took 7 days, but that's what that whole thing was about, instant karma and instant song.
Oh yeah, I know. Right where I live here, and right where I live in Rockland County, where I grew up in Suffern. May Pang is a good friend of mine, and May, he was literally, they used to hang out at the diner right up in Suffern. He was with May that whole time I was there. And May's out she did a film on him. She's going around the country now doing a film about her time with Lennon. She was with him when Yoko kind of farmed him out when they were having problems, and May was very close, lived with him for 2 years, and then really helped him unite with Julian. She helped him create a relationship with Julian, who Yoko had kind of, dissed. And so May was really instrumental with kind of helping rebuild that relationship. And this was right down the road from where I grew up. I didn't even know they were there at the time when they were just hanging out to get out of the city. It was up in Mount Ivy, right where I grew up, Suffern, New York.
So May Pang worked with Eric Taros, the guy in Swamp Scott that worked with Peter Jackson. Eric is a fundamental piece of that movie, which is marvelous. Have you seen it?
Which one?
The May Pang movie.
Yeah, I've seen it many times. I used to go. Played her. May is a very close friend. I used to go out and play. She'd have parties every year, Memorial Day, and we'd go up and play, do jams. I have these live jams at her house like every year. So I've known May for a long, long time. I saw all the preliminary stuff before the movie got released because she was working on that forever,
Yeah.
and she spent a lot of time. And it's a really good film. She did a great job on it.
Well, it gives me the insight as a Lennon fan on his solo years because I love that solo stuff, but I didn't know much about it. Even having read everything I read, that movie kind of clarifies, wow, where he was and what he did. I
Yeah,
love it. It's
yeah. No, May's a sweetheart, and she was really, 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 instrumental. It kind of, it's, how it ended up is a whole nother story. But May is just really, she's a real. I mean, we're very close friends. I mean, she's very close friends with my wife. Because they've both been filmmakers, and they're both, revolve around that world. And they both love film, and she's a sweetheart.
oh yeah, and it's a great. I urge everyone to go see that film, free
It's a great
because we're
film.
on public access. We have to go see it for free, but it's
Yeah,
out there,
it's
and
a great film. Yeah.
it's really tremendous. That's wow. There's a lot of musical people up in your area. You're in Hudson or so around there.
I'm in the Hudson Valley. I grew up in Suffern, which is in Rockland County, but just north of New York. And but I moved further north up near the Bear Mountain Bridge, and near a town near Cold Spring. It's called Cold Spring, and I love it here. It's like it's just, I can be in the city if I need to be in the city pretty quickly, and the train line runs right in. And it's close by. My family is in the city. My mother's is 104. She's in the city, and my
God
sister's
bless
in
her.
my
Wow,
my mother,
104.
my sister is also down. She's an artist, and she's in Soho. So my whole family's been, based in New York our whole lives. And so even when I went when I left when I was in Boston, I was there for 10 years. And then, when the band broke up, I stayed there for a little bit longer, but then I finally and I lived all over Boston. I mean, I lived in, Cambridge, and then I lived up in Rockport for years. That's where I had my son when he was first born. I was in Rockport. And then I came back to New York. But this area, there's a lot of, between here and then Woodstock and the whole Hudson Valley, there's a lot of musicians, around, and so I'm very fond of this area.
Yeah, Bobby Hebb and David Robertson, the drummer from the Cars, they were in Rockport. But Gloucester now has just like a whole plethora of musical
I
people.
loved it up there, and I still love it up there. I have a lot of friends still there. One of the really great guitar players, luthiers, Ken Parker's there. He made the Parker guitars, which is that's what enabled Joni Mitchell had a terrible time with playing live because she had all these alternate tunings, and Ken hooked her up with his Parker guitar with a VG8 so she could use alternate tunings on one instrument. And she that was like a real blessing for her because the she was able to do all these alternate tunings with just using this very light guitar and not have to kind of be spending her time because she said she went through a whole time when she had a hard time touring because she would literally do, and I learned, which I can relate to because I did the same thing. I didn't know when I started out the guitars are supposed to be in a particular tuning. So I used to write in a lot of open tunings. And eventually I had to kind of draw it in and get down to, I brought it down to now where I use like regular tuning and then open G and then open C sometimes, but I keep it to those two tunings. Otherwise, you spend your life tuning your guitar. And I don't have a tech to, Jackson and all the, these guys, they have these techs that are with them and they have like 25 guitars and they just hand them guitars. Well, I don't have that luxury. I go out and I'm carrying like two guitars and I got to make it work. And I don't want to tune in front of the audience the whole time.
But it's pretty much a trio now.
It's what the focus right now is, yeah, duo trio. It's really we're doing on the River Club date on March 1st. Paul Sokolow is joining us for trio, and Paul is amazing. He's played with like all of the most brilliant Brazilian artists. He's played with David Byrne as well, and many people. He's a brilliant bass player, and we've known each other way back from the Boston days. And so it's going to be a trio. And I've come back to kind of the more intimate setting of duo trio simply because I love playing as a band and I love to get up there and rock. But what happens is when you're in a band setting, it pushes the audience further away. It's like it's another dynamic. And as soon as you come down to like bringing the songs where they started, kind of in this acoustic environment, people you find the whole audience just comes really up close and you get into this very kind of personal vulnerable place where you really have an exchange going on. And so I've been really enjoying that, and also that's kind of where all the songs start. That's how all the things that I write really come in that setting, and so it kind of brings the songs to the place where it's very much a give and take.
I saw Carla Bonoff and Livingston
Living
Taylor,
Yeah, Liv's been out with Carla, yeah.
and in December at the City Winery. And
Yeah,
I interviewed Liv, of course, through John Lappin and Carla Bonoff, and I love them both, right?
yeah, they're both great.
I saw Liv in the 70s opening for Jethro Tull, of all people.
Yeah.
But that's Don, right? Don Law.
Yeah, well, Don managed Liv and I. That's so when
Right.
I first went to Don, he was managing Liv and he managed me and Liv. And he was also at the time managing Jay Giles, kind of, but they were going through some changes. And then he was helping Jay Giles, but he didn't officially manage them. And he worked with Peter. But and then it got to where he was just handling me and Liv, and he had Joe Perry for a little while.
Right.
But he was really just concentrating on me and Liv. And Livingston is just speaks for himself. Livingston is great, and I worked with him and all the Taylors. I worked with James and Liv and Alex
And
and
Kate.
Kate
I
for
love Kate.
all through the '70s. I did a lot of dates with all of them.
Wow. I was going to talk to you about all the people you did dates with, but I want to tell you the story. So, like, Liv walks by me 3 times,
Mhm.
and I'm like, I should say hi to the guy. 4th time he walks, I grab him. I'm the guy who interviewed you. He goes, oh, cool, and we're talking. Carolyn, who's been in my band 50 years now, we're the only two that survived the band, right? I brought her with me, and she goes to Liv, you sang at my grammar school. They had a thing with Liv Taylor, and she was one of the students. It's kind of funny. But it's just, like you said, it's great to be in that intimate atmosphere. And I love what they did. Carla and Liv came out together and started playing. Then he leaves her and she's alone. And then he comes out alone. And they do this wild thing where it's not Carla opening for Liv. It's a combo.
Well, they're both great. I mean, yeah, it's and Liv is a great performer. I mean, he's a consummate performer, and Liv's really good at what he does, and Carla's really talented. I mean, she's always been really great. So that's a great combo.
You've played with so many people over the years. The list is staggering. Um, any anecdotes are fun, or maybe a concert you saw with someone that you opened for, and it was just something you remember?
There's so many bizarre memories. There were so many from that in that period of time. It's hard to describe to younger people at that time what it was like back then, because back then the laws, the rules hadn't been written at that point within the record business, within the music business. And when you go to these huge shows, it was before alcohol and drugs were banned. I mean, people would come to shows and they would be lit. They would be lit by the time the show started. And I mean, there were some shows that some things went on that you could not believe. I remember we were opening for Yes and Gary Wright at a place called
Wow.
Roosevelt Stadium in New
Wow.
Jersey. And the people had been coming in all day and they were blitzed by the time we went on. And there were people throwing firecrackers and stuff on the stage. There were people throwing M80s on the stage, like having fun. Like that was their idea of fun, throwing this shit at the stage. And we were in the middle of a song and I didn't see it, but Troy saw it. Something just kind of out of the corner of my eye came by, and Troy, my bass player, just stepped aside, and I watched it go by, and I finished the song, and I looked back, and somebody had thrown an apple, and it went right through the back of my guitar and split my guitar wide open behind me.
Whoa.
And I didn't know until the song ended because I was going to go back and pick up that guitar, and I turned around and I went, okay. And I said, I'm done. And I walked off
Wow.
because I went, I don't need that. And I remember sitting there having, John Scher, the promoter, had a big fight with me and said, get back on the stage, and was ordering back. And I said, you go back on the stage. I'm not going back out there. But, there was a lot of stuff that went on that you just kind of couldn't believe because it was like the Wild West. I once saw a show. Don did the Who at the Garden, and I was off to the on the side of the stage. And during their set, some kid ran up on the stage and took John Entwistle's French horn, grabbed it, and dove off into the crowd. And Don had these really big goons
I
at the show. I
remember.
mean, he had real tough bounce. They took this guy, they got the French horn, and they threw him out. Then the show goes on. About a half an hour passes. Same guy got back up on the stage and goes after it again. This guy, I never saw anybody was. This guy just had to have this French horn. It was the funniest thing I ever saw. And this guy refused. Somehow he got back in and went for it the second time. So, things like that, don't forget. It was really bizarre.
71, 72. Don had The Who at the music hall for 3 nights in a row. Who's next?
Mhm.
Brilliant. That was
Yeah,
best.
great stuff. Great stuff.
They were so good that night. You know,
Yeah. There was a ton of I mean, Don had all Don was one of the best promoters in the country. I mean, of all the promoters we worked with, and we saw all of them, and he and Graham were the tops. Graham was just really, really good and a really gracious, sweet guy. Don was exactly the same. He was just top notch. I mean, his shows were really, really well done, and still to this day, he's still involved with Live Aid. I mean, he's still active.
Live Nation, right?
Live Nation, I'm sorry, Live
Yeah.
Nation. Yeah, no, Don's still at it, and he's the best at what he does. I mean, he's just a really good. He knows what he's doing.
So they brought Bon Jovi in 1985,
Hmm.
and the show was in trouble, and Neil Jacobson was working for Don, and Neil called me up and said,
Neil
"Can you?"
used to work with us. Yeah,
Yeah. So you know Neil, right?
yeah,
I worked for Neil for like 18 years. Through Don, I
mhm,
was their independent
very
contractor.
well. Yeah,
So we saved the Bon Jovi show because he had sold 15 tickets. He had only the hit "Runaway,"
mm,
and then Don Masters at Polygram, they got 90. They got 75 tickets to 90. We put 300 people in the room. I got to promoting it, and it was like it was jammed, and it was a great night. Now Bon Jovi's Bon Jovi,
you're right.
but that was the starting. But it was Motley Crue's manager and the Scorpions, and they had Bon Jovi, and interesting time John, interesting
Well, it was
days.
fun to be around. It was kind of like, there was it was fun to be in the business back then because it was literally like the Wild West. Nothing was written yet, and the record labels. The fun part about it was it hadn't been figured out yet and it hadn't been calculated. And so the record labels would really take a gamble on things, and they would really take chances. They would roll the dice and see where it went. And that's kind of gone. It's just like banking.
I really enjoyed this conversation with you because we got to some stuff we never talked about before.
Yeah.
And you have such a rich history, and I'm so appreciative of the work you've done.
Well, listen, Joe, I really appreciate your having me. And anytime you want to talk, I mean, I'm always around. So I mean, I'm here, and I'm usually here. I'm in this area. I get out of Nashville now and then. I still have a place in Nashville, but I'm spending more time here now, and so I'm around. So and we're going to be up there. We're doing that the River Music Hall, and we'll be doing some more rooms up in the area. It's been a little slower than I'd like it live wise, but there's stuff coming in here and there. It's not. I'd like to be working more live than I am, but listen, I feel fortunate to have the work and when it comes and be connecting wherever we can.
Do you remember the road the River Music Hall is on in Situate?
The road that it's on, I don't recall.
Yeah, I don't either, but like anyone can Google the River Music Hall and
Yeah, River Club. I think it's River Club Music Hall. River, I think it
yeah.
is. Yeah. But it's a really nice room. I mean, and there, all the people who run it are all the whole staff, everybody who works there is really, really great.
Oh, I hear only good things about it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
yeah.
listen, keep in touch, and as I said, there's going to be a new site coming. There's a couple of there's been singles kind of continuously being released on all the portals, like on YouTube and Apple and all that. There's stuff that's been constantly kind of come moving along, and there's another one that we're working on now that's coming up. So I'm trying to just kind of keep the wheels turning, as opposed to kind of waiting for, an album, putting all that work into it. Just trying to keep a steady flow. So doing my best.
Well, my home base is now ECTV Everett, which is right near the casino,
Yeah,
and then I'm at Reading Cable. But here in Wakefield, returning here, I love this setup they have. So I think I'm going to be doing this a lot more.
that sounds great.
You're the first guy. Thank you for putting up with our
No, no, this is
situations.
fine. I mean, there's always glitches with all this stuff. Listen, Joe, you take care, and I hope stay healthy and well up there, and hopefully we'll run into each other on the road.
All right. Great luck at the club. Thanks, man.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye bye. Bye.